Hello and welcome to today's Lunch and Look at Home. I am Jennifer Rastari Dickinson, Director of Education of the Stark Museum of Art. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Lunch and Look at Home, What Home Means. Dr. Sarah Boehme, our curator here at the museum, has prepared a wonderful program for you, and we're excited to get right into it today. Today's program will be approximately 45 to 50 minutes, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. I am going to ask during the program that you keep your mic muted. If you find that you have a question you don't want to lose, please feel free to use that chat function. I am monitoring the chat, and we'll try to make sure that we get any questions asked during the program answered afterwards. If you have technical difficulties, that is also a great place to reach us. We can work through any possible problems that we can resolve with you there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sarah Boehme.
Good morning and welcome to our program on our special exhibition, The West is Home. Today, I want to use this opportunity to explore the exhibition and to delve a little deeper into some of the stories around the works of art. Our exhibition has 4 themes: home as land, shelter, interior space, and family. Our exhibition, The West is Home, uses the Stark Museum of Art's collection to consider what home means. We'll look as we go through the program today at a small selection of works in each section, and then we'll go a little bit deeper with one work of art in each of those selections. We begin with, of course, the land. Home on the range. The opening words of a cowboy song introduce the idea that home can be the land and the outdoor setting. The American West, with its dramatic landscape, provides elements with rich associations. Yet the land of the West can be a contested space. The native peoples have strong associations with traditional homelands. Euro-American settlers saw the land as an opportunity. Conflicts over who had the right to call a place home can be an indelible stain in our national history. Now for Texans, a landscape with bluebonnets says home. Bluebonnet paintings were a specialty of Porfirio Salinas, who was born in Bastrop, Texas, and then lived in San Antonio, Texas. His mother was a native of Mexico, so he brought Hispanic heritage to his artworks. But he developed his career of painting the state flower. This scene represents a landscape in Fredericksburg, Texas. The blue skies and fluffy clouds dominate the dry desert landscape of Albert Grohl's painting. The clouds seem to promise a brighter future for that small element in the foreground. A solitary covered wagon, noticed a little white area of paint in the midground, winds its way through the empty expanse, heading toward a new home on the other side of the mountains. The artist's style of loose brushstrokes and unconventional composition is modern in approach. The idea that settlers came into an totally uninhabited land conveys a very persistent and often misleading message. It sends a signal about who has the opportunity to make a home here. Thomas Blackshear's painting, on the other hand, shows the strong association of native peoples with their traditional homelands. His powerful image unites a Native American figure with an eagle within a dramatic landscape. The artist's statement, he referred to the eagle as a spirit guide. As a stylistic influence, Blackshear cited the painter Maynard Dixon. Dixon also wrote poetry, and his poem Homeland seems to be in harmony with Blackshear's painting. The mighty West looms fast before my sight, and on its farthest rim I see my soul arise, broad-winged and free, and beckon me. The land, its very self, was significant to the native peoples, and this pottery from Acoma Pueblo reveals the importance of the land. The very clay of the land was used to make the pot, and the artist used natural pigments to make painted designs. The painting in this case includes aspects of nature such as elk and plants. And coming from Accowat Pueblo, it's one of the oldest continually inhabited communities in North America, dating back to about 1150 AD. The work I would like to look at in a little more depth is O.E. Birninghouse's painting, Resting, Home from Blue Lake. It appears on the surface to be one of the quieter interpretations of the importance of land. Two Indian horsemen with pack horses have stopped. It has a very casual look to its composition. One rider is dismounted to adjust something on his pack horse. The other rider remains mounted, holding on to the reins for his half-hidden pack horse, seemingly just a snapshot of a moment. They're shown against a background of the mountain, which fills almost half of the canvas. It's very low key in color. I think perhaps intentionally the artist downplayed drama around this scene to make it seem a very everyday occurrence of the trip. Let's look a little bit at the background of the artist. Oscar E. Birninghouse was a native of St. Louis. He began his artistic career there. You see a portrait of Birninghouse by fellow Taos artist E. Martin Hennings. Birninghouse worked in commercial art and illustration through much of his career in St. Louis, but always striving to establish his career as a fine artist. In 1898, he traveled to Taos, New Mexico, 1899, and he was captivated by the landscape and began a process of returning each summer to visit Taos, establishing a career there. And he was one of the founding member of the Taos Society of Artists in 1915 and exhibited with them, and settled permanently there in 1925. Like most artists attracted to New Mexico, the landscape was a source for his brush, although often he showed paintings with scenes of the inhabited West, as we see in the painting of the ranch house with white portal in the upper right. It was often the occupied land that Birninghouse focused on. He was also noted for his scenes of Indian life, often around the feast days and ceremonies, aspects of ceremonies, such as racers at the Pueblo in the upper left, depicting the races held in conjunction with a feast day. But he also showed the more prosaic life of every day, as in threshing wheat at the Pueblo. In a way, the painting Resting Home Trip from Blue Lake combines all of those areas, the land, the ceremony, and everyday life. Now, but the ceremony is really only hinted through the title, which mentions Blue Lake, and that's in its essence the key to the painting. Blue Lake is a lake within the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. It's sacred to the Taos Pueblo people and was part of their homelands and what was considered the extension of their Pueblo. It was the site of summer pilgrimages for ceremonies. In 1906, however, President Theodore Roosevelt authorized making Blue Lake and surrounding land into the Carson National Forest. National forests have multiple uses. The Taos Pueblo religious beliefs around the land were not compatible with the logging and recreational activities of a national forest. Thus began a long process of the Pueblo leadership, supported by sympathetic Anglos, to have Blue Lake territory returned to the jurisdiction of the tribe. Burning House, as well as other Taos artists, were aware of the controversy, and his depictions respect the autonomy of the Taos people. In this and other paintings, he portrayed Taos people traveling to and from Blue Lake, but he did not breach the ceremony or the site itself, which was only for the Pueblo people, different values in religious beliefs. Similarly, Ernest Martin Hennings, whose painting Entering the Canyon has been cited as a representation of one of the trips to Blue Lake, showing the process toward the ceremony, but not showing ceremonies itself. Now, Burning House did not date his painting, but it was likely done toward the end of his life. He passed away in 1952, and the conflict at that point was still unresolved. In 1962, his widow, Mrs. O.E. Winifred Burning House, signed a petition along with Helen Green Blumenschein, the daughter of E.L. Blumenschein, and Joan Higgins Reed, the daughter of artist Victor Higgins, and Mabel Dodge Lujan, the socialite artist and writer, and many other prominent Taos Village residents. Their petition asked for justice for the Indians of Taos Pueblo and protection of their right to freedom of religion. The signers supported and endorsed the right of Taos Indian Pueblo to the Blue Lake area. And this petition was presented to members of Congress. Finally, in 1970, Congress passed legislation, and President Richard Nixon signed it into law, restoring the Blue Lake area to Taos Pueblo. This was one of the rare instances of restoration of Indian lands to the people and an acknowledgement of their freedom of religion. Burning House's painting indicates a respect for the Pueblo people and their homeland. The second section of the West's home is shelter. Now, dwellings provide a solution to a practical need. They give protection from the elements. And although a house is not a home, a particular kind of structure can evoke the sentiments associated with a home. In the West, there are many different types of lodgings. Different types of buildings are associated with cultural groups, and housing can indicate a cultural identity. A multi-step Pueblo has meaning for many. Edward S. Curtis photographed the terraced house and the multi-storied homes of Zuni Pueblo. Puebloan people of the Southwest developed large communal buildings. These provided homes for many families, and the terraces made outdoor spaces on the rooftops and provided for interaction from the families. A solitary log cabin in the woods signifies home to others. Springbrook Cabin depicts the home where Pansy Stockton and her first husband, Roscoe Kenneth Stockton, honeymooned and began their married life. This log cabin in the Rocky Mountains also inspired several of her artworks. She used organic materials from the surroundings to create her works, and used the collage method to design a representation of the cabin that had so much personal meaning to the artist and her family. Our focal piece for the shelter section is this intriguing representation, a Dine R. Navajo Weaving, made probably around 1950 by an unidentified artist. It was common in those that weavers did not sign their works, and their names were not preserved by the sellers who traded weavings in the early 20th century from the trading post on the Navajo reservation. This is a type of weaving known as a pictorial because it has pictures, representations of peoples and things. This weaving has symmetrical rows of one-story buildings, two-story buildings with stylized figures. To unravel the meaning of this work, it's helpful to look at some of the history of Navajo weavings. The weaving on the left is the most traditional early work of Navajo weaving, the chief blanket. It features a design of stripes of natural color yarns with color blocks at the corner and the center. These early Navajo weavings were literally abstract designs. The weaving on the right is an instance of the introduction of representational imagery. This work has been dated to the early 20th century and attributed to a specific weaver, Yana Pa. She was married to Richard Simpson, the British immigrant owner of a trading post on the Navajo reservation. She's known to have woven 4 rugs with figures related to the Ye, the spiritual beings of the Navajo. She was one of the first weavers to incorporate these figures into weavings. The Yebiche that are shown in this weaving are the dancers who in ceremonies represent the spirits. Rugs and other weavings became, with Yebiche representations of rows of dancers, became prominent in Navajo weavings, especially around the 1920s. And we see this handsome rug from the collection of the Stark Museum with a row of dancers wearing their traditional kilts and a very handsome composition. Now, not all Navajo weavings with pictures dealt with spiritual aspects. For example, on the right is a 20th century representation of a Plains Indian on horseback. Certainly an image that doesn't reflect Navajo life, but rather appeals to an Anglo concept of what signifies an Indian. This was probably made very specifically to appeal to an audience wanting a souvenir rug. The example on the left is a very contemporary weaving done by weaver Ella Begay, and it is a pictorial that shows imagery of everyday life on the reservation. And this is a type of weaving that began in the early 20th century. Weavers began looking around and starting to represent everyday objects and everyday life in their weavings, both to capture life and to appeal to the tourist trade. The weaving on the left, you can see, has the frame houses of 20th century life with cattle raising and automobiles or trucks necessary for transportation on the reservation. And in the upper register, the scene of sheep herding and a sheep wagon, a traditional hogan, and even a weaver making a weaving. Our focus piece then is within this tradition of showing reservation life, probably indicated by those single-story houses, but they're alternating with rows of dancers and Indian chiefs with feathered war bonnets. There are also 2-story buildings, which introduce another pictorial element. These 2-story buildings are unlikely to represent typical reservation homes, which would be more in the architecture of a 1-story building. When this 1950 weaving was purchased by the Stark family, the invoice identified it as Little Schoolhouse Rug. And I think that associated title, along with comparisons with other rugs of the 20th century, I think it is likely that this rug with two-story buildings refers to Indian boarding schools that were both school and home to many young Navajo students. Here's a photograph that is an example of an Indian boarding school. I'm not saying it's a direct inspiration for our weaving, but it shows the type of institutional building used in the boarding schools. It's two-story and quite imposing, and it could typify the boarding school experience. The boarding schools were a product of the process of assimilation that the US government promoted. Boarding schools were run by missionary societies and by the US government itself with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Indian children were separated from their families and cultures and sent to residential schools, some quite far from their family homes. So the schools became a second residence for them. At the boarding schools, they had to speak English, not their native language. They had to give up aspects of their culture. And for many, the boarding schools, while providing education, the experience was a painful one that continued to have reverberation. The weaver of this rug incorporates the boarding school buildings in the design with the figures alternating. On one hand, the rug was intended probably for the tourist audience. The dancers, the Yebiche stylized dancers, and the Indian heads, perhaps evoking the idea of the Indian head nickel, simply give stereotypical representations of Indians, so that this would signal, oh, this is an Indian subject that I can take as a souvenir. On the other hand, I think the weaver is representing figures that actually retain their traditional culture within this boarding school setting that opposes it. And I think one can also read this rug as an example of resilience in facing the opposition of cultures. Our third section, the interior space of a shelter, can be one of the most powerful indications of homes. In this slide, we see two doors opening into the space, but as in Victor Higgins' painting, Adobe Doorway, and then a beautiful teepee door from an Arapaho maker, signaling the protection of the door from outside forces. The interior is an enclosure that can signify warmth and comfort. The objects contained in the dwelling can also create a sense of individual personality, as well as cultural significance and communal identity. For example, the mealtime table is a central piece of furniture in an interior. Families often gather around the mealtime table, and friends come and share in the life of the home. And this is a central motif for many homes. Andy Anderson carved by hand this dining room table in his very rustic style. He made it for use in his own home, and he carved and painted caricature portraits on the chair backs that identify whose chair it is. And he has room for the man and the lady of the house, as well as friends and family. For our focus in this section, I want to look at a pair of paintings by artist John Young Hunter, his Taos Front Door and his house dining room. This pair of paintings are depictions of John Younghunter's home in Taos, New Mexico, an adobe home at 560 Piedmont Street that is still extant and contains features seen in these paintings. Younghunter's journey to Taos was a long one, and his life story is illuminating. On the left is a photograph of John Younghunter's autobiography, published posthumously, a reproduction of a self-portrait as a rather dapper gentleman graces the cover. Younghunter was born in Scotland, and you see on the right one of his lovely Scottish landscapes near Inverary. He was born into an artistic family. His father was a painter also, and his father saw that John had the best art training available in London. John Younghunter developed a successful career in London, primarily as a society portrait painter. You see on the left an example of one of his portraits. He was very much a member of elite society in London with his connections and associations with artists such as John Singer Sargent. But he also, while in London, met the Western American artist Charlie Russell when Russell brought an exhibition of his paintings to England. Younghunter met him, and the two artists from very different backgrounds developed a friendship. And Younghunter eventually decided to leave England and all that he knew there to immigrate to the United States. He said he was drawn to the romance of the West. As a boy, he had attended a performance of Buffalo Bill's Wild West exposition, and that created indelible images of the West that would later fuel his resolve to leave the old world and go to the new. He came to the US and first to Boston, and he traveled to Montana and was able to spend time on the Crow Reservation, which inspired a number of beautiful paintings, such as his painting A Child of the Plains of Sorca Indian, from a young crow on horseback, showing the beautiful beadwork and artistry of Crow artists. He also spent time with Charlie Russell at his rustic cabin on Lake McDonald in Northwest Montana. Yet Younghunter, like many artists, would be drawn to the artistic colony of Taos, New Mexico, where he found another aspect of the American West in the beautiful traditions of the Pueblo people. And he did such paintings as this work representing a Christmas Eve procession leaving the church, showing a very complex composition of the group of fiesta participants and the combining of Anglo-Catholic imagery with traditional Pueblo customs. The home that he established in Taos reflects the expansive personality of Younghunter. It's clearly Southwestern, his adopted land with its adobe walls and rustic ceiling, yet it has sophisticated elegance with its chandelier and table setting resembling a European still life. Younghunter's paintings of his home reflect the style, quality, and taste that he wrote about as his artistic philosophy in his book, Reviewing the Years. The final section of The West is Home is family. Home is most importantly a connection with people. Relatives and relationships can be even more powerful than objects and spaces. People supply the emotional resonance of home. A nuclear family or extended family can mean home. It can also be the local community, which we see in Ernest Blumenshine's painting Ourselves and Taos Neighbors. In the foreground are the artist and his family, the artist in the red sweater, his wife in the blue flowered shawl, and his daughter, Helen Green Blumenshine, sitting stiffly among her with her family. He also surrounds himself in the background with, in the midground really, with other representations of Taos residents, the artists, writers, and creative people of the artist community of Taos, as well as representations of the Taos Pueblo people and the Hispanic residents of the Taos village. The diversity of the West enriches our ideas of what family and home are, and the need for human connection can unite us. In this section of the exhibition, we have works of art that represent specific families, and here is Nikolai Fashin's beautiful painting of his daughter Iya, shown with his beautiful brushwork, representing the tender ideal of a young child. This jar reminds us also that families can work together in making art. Rosalie and Joe Aguilar were a married couple who made beautiful pottery together. Joe came from a family with a tradition of pottery making. He painted pots for his mother at San Ildefonso Pueblo. And Rosalie came from another Pueblo, and after she married Joe, she made blackware pottery in the San Ildefonso style. And Joe painted many of her pots. And then the couple had 11 children, and many of their children and grandchildren became potters and handed down the process and creativity associated with making pottery. Very important aspect of family is likewise seen in E. Martin Henning's painting, The Weaver. In 1955, Henning's traveled from Taos, where he was living, to the Navajo reservation to make paintings for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad to use in their publicity efforts. He first went to one part of the reservation and was not successful in finding models. And then he went to the area of the Hubble Trading Post at Granada. And here he found a great opportunity. He was able to live in the guest house at Hubble Trading Post. He described it as a modernized hogan, referring to the traditional form of the Navajo home. This guest house was built in this circular shape to resemble traditional homes of the Navajo. Here we have Edward Curtis's photograph of a traditional hogan from Curtis's the portfolio of the North American Indian. This is one in the text volume. You see the dome-like representation of the hogan covered with has a base structure and then covered with earth. On the Navajo reservation, Hennings had to hire models for the paintings that he wanted to produce of Navajo people in their traditional setting, producing works of art and observing aspects of traditional Navajo life. Actually, at this time in the 1950s, many of the Navajo did not speak English. And thus, Hennings encountered difficulties in communication and in hiring models, which is very different from the setting at Taos, where he had opportunities to hire models from the Taos Pueblo and was able to communicate easily. So he found a woman who spoke both Navajo and English, and she helped him find models who would agree to pose for his painting. This painting was done as part of that project of creating images for the railroad that they would use in their publicity to entice people to come out to the Southwest using the railroad and to see scenes such as those depicted by Hennings. They did not choose to buy this painting, although they did purchase others by Hennings for their publicity, and thus in subsequent years, Lutcher Stark was able to acquire this painting for the collection that would eventually become his museum. So Hennings had to communicate with his model through an interpreter. He did record the name of the sitter, and we know that she is Martha Saucy, and that this is her daughter. Hennings did not record the daughter's name, although we can, with other information, at least identify the possible identity of the figure. Because in subsequent years, researchers have done oral history interviews with Martha Saucy, and we know more about her from her own words that are preserved in oral history transcripts at the archive established by the Hubble Trading Post. Martha was born in Wood Springs, Arizona, and grew up in cornfields and lived there near the Hubble Trading Post of Granada. Both of her grandmothers were weavers. And when Martha Saucy introduced herself, she would, as most Navajo people do, introduce herself by identifying her clan. Her maternal clan was Bitterwater Clan, and her paternal clan was Honeycombed Rock people. Martha Saucy learned to weave at age 8. Her mother was also a weaver, but her grandmother was her first instructor. Martha Saucy's first weaving was a striped piece, so it might have been in the style of a chief blanket. When she was asked in oral interviews about her style of weaving, she said she did red, referring to the ganado red, which was a dominant style around the Hubble Trading Post. You see her working on a weaving in this painting in the ganado red style with that red background, and then geometrical designs in the whites and gray yarns. But she also did other patterns. She did a storm pattern, and she mentioned that she did vegetal dye weavings that were striped with small designs in between the style. This is the revival style of that's often associated with other parts of the reservation. She acknowledged the importance of learning from her grandmother. She said, "I tell my children about their grandmother. She was a strenuous woman." Martha Saucy described in her own family, the siblings she grew up with, that the daughters learned to weave, although Martha Saucy was the only one who continued weaving through her adulthood, according to her interviews. The other sisters took more modern jobs. Martha Saucy and her husband had 2 sons and 2 daughters. She said her daughter Lorraine never wove, but only did the spinning of the wool. And she said the other one, she weaves. So her daughter Bernita possibly carried on the tradition of weaving in the family. When Martha Saucy was asked by weavers if she enjoyed weaving, she said, "Yes, because that's all I buy my food with, and I am happy." Martha's traditions and her work were part of her family life that signified home. And her traditions were at least carried forward with some of the family members into the future, and the strong artistic creation that provided the family life, much of the family livelihood, came about and became part of what home meant for Martha Saucy, and was conveyed in Ernest Martin Henning's painting. I hope that you will have an opportunity to visit the Stark Museum in person and see our exhibition, which will be on view through January 22nd in 2022. You can also see on our website under the exhibition tab, you can see works of art from the exhibition and the label text that goes with individual works of art. And I hope you will have an opportunity to enjoy viewing these at your own leisure and to reflect on your idea of what home means. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sarah. I'm sorry, guys, I was chatting and I had the mute off. We are so appreciative, Sarah, of that wonderful presentation. I'm going to open us up now. Are there questions from the audience? You're welcome to unmute, turn your video on if you would like. We'd love to hear from you if you have questions. We'll give people just a minute to respond, Sarah. All right. Well, Sarah, I really enjoyed the images that you shared of the Hennings and talking about Saucy. I think that was, it's wonderful that they've done such incredible oral histories with her.
Yes, and she gave those interviews in Navajo. She continued throughout her life for Navajo language to be her primary language. And so the transcripts have been translated into English, fortunately. And although I could say, sometimes some of the wording one wondered about the translations, and I would have liked a little more detail in certain areas, but it was exciting to find those interviews. She did express some of the difficulties with the traders and in getting the financial compensation for her work. She did talk about early in her career how they had used the natural wool, but they also relied as well on some commercial yarn for various reasons. Like sometimes the quality of the sheep's wool was not what it had been in the early days. So the commercial yarn made more sense. So, so far I was only able to find, there is one identified weaving by Martha Saucy in the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. It is a flag design, and it's available on their website. As most of these would have been sold without identification of weaver. That's why they're often not identified by person, but I'm sure there are more weavings by Martha Saucy in collections.
All right, and Sarah, I have a question here from Hannah, and she's asking, what inspired the categories you selected for the exhibition? And did the pandemic change the way you interpreted the content?
The the sections were identified from reading about what home means and some of the literature, and some discussions in our exhibition meetings. And I sort of, and they to me came from sort of large down to most intimate, from the expanse of the land to the buildings to inside the buildings, and then to really what's inside the buildings, the people. Because I think when you throw out the question to general audiences, often home means family. The pandemic, that was part of the reason for the genesis of the exhibition, as we were looking for what is meaningful to people today. As part of our exhibition process, we want exhibitions that will touch our audience. And most of us have been spending so much time, our work was at home, like Martha's, but somewhat different. This seemed like the perfect theme to explore.
Hannah says, thanks. I just want to mention, I did put a link in on to the National Museum of American Indian with the Martha Sosi Weaving. So if you wanted to see that link is directly there. Also, I have dropped a link into the online objects, the exhibition online and the objects, if you would like to view that. Any other questions today before we wrap up? I want to make sure we give everyone a chance to ask any questions they might have. Another minute. While we wait, Sarah, I'm curious to see which is your favorite object in telling of home from the exhibition. If you had to pick one work that highlights home, which one was your favorite from the exhibition?
Oh, that's a great question, which changes depending on what I'm working on. I'm in awe of the Thomas Blackshear painting. That it's just such a gorgeous statement, and we wanted very much to include it in this exhibition, although it can convey a number of complex ideas. So I think that's probably one of my favorites. But the Andy Anderson was one that I normally would not have leaned to, but it was such a perfect statement for this exhibition, and it was such fun to be able to include it.
And the Andy Anderson Sarah is mentioning is a table, dining tables and chairs. I've just dropped a link into the Thomas Blackshear painting, and I'm going to include a link here in just a moment for the Andy Anderson chair, table and chairs as well, so that you can see those items. Well, Sarah, I think we've had some thank yous along in here. Someone shared it was a wonderful exhibition and presentation that really illuminated the backstories. We've had a comment that's outstanding. Friends, we are so glad that you took the time to join us today, and we hope that you will make plans to join us again. I do want to tease that we have one more lunch and look at home left for the 2021 year. Sarah will be presenting on Charlie Russell's Holiday Greetings on Thursday, December 2nd at noon. Invitations will be going out for that shortly. If you participated in a lunch at Look and Home before, you'll get an invitation when registration opens to join us again. And I certainly hope you will. Those Charlie Russell letters, and especially his holiday greetings, are beloved items from our collection. And we're so glad that we'll be able to bring those out at Christmas time. All right, anything you want to add, Sarah?
No, just thanks for participating today, and enjoy the exhibition on one level or more than one level.
All right. Well, thank you again, and have a great afternoon. And we look forward to seeing you again in the future. This program was recorded today and will be made available hopefully early next week. So if you have colleagues or friends who missed it and want to see it, it will be available online at starkmuseum.org, as well as on our Stark Art and History Venues YouTube channel. Thank you, and have a great afternoon.